I'm trying not to embarrass the family and get all giddy, but I am really excited to meet you.
Well, thank you.
Yes, I was so looking forward to you coming to Knoxville to hanging out with us. I mean, we were going to leave Loki at home, but I was looking forward to you coming and chilling with us. So, you know what? After COVID, you still got a date here because we don't forget.
I would love to come.
I double dog dare you.
However, you are definitely from the South. Double dog is not something you hear feel a lot.
That's a Tennessee Southern thing.
Yeah, you don't hear that in New York. Oh God. Oh, very nice.
Yes, I'm so nice. It's so good to meet you. Thank you.
Wow, that's very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
What's up? So we're gonna talk about urban renewal?
Yeah.
Oh God.
Yeah, a little bit of gentrification to throw in there as well.
Now, do you live in Nashville? I mean in
Mr. Brown, it is probably the saddest story you're ever gonna hear. Because not only do I live in Knoxville, I've been here my entire life. Even went to the University of Tennessee, which is all of 2 miles from the house I grew up in. I mean, really, I know this is not supposed to be a sad occasion, but it's a pitiful story. I'm a native, born and raised.
Well, there must be something about it you like. So
either that or I'm just like everybody else, have no sense. I'm one of those people are crazy as all get out and just don't know no better.
Well, you sound like you're doing all right though, so that's good.
You make it.
Personally, I have no desire to be in the South. So.
And I don't blame you. And when I say Tennessee is as crazy as it gets.
Yeah, well. Yeah. You have some problems.
We got some issues. So anyway, I believe by faith that God is saying, so this is my assignment. So I've been dealing with him on that for a long time.
That's cool.
All right, y'all ready?
Sure.
All right. Okay. Let's see. So let me try to get this intro correct. Let's see where we answer the questions we all need to be asking about race. Okay. Welcome to The Uncomfortable Truth, where we answer the questions we all need to be asking about race and racism in America. This is Loki Mulholland.
And I'm LeVon Brown.
And it's time
to be uncomfortable.
Well, now Renee messed it all up.
I'm sorry. I didn't know.
Get uncomfortable.
All right, one more time. Ready now?
We'll try it again.
You won't be on the screen for this one, Renee.
Oh, I'm not there. Okay, gotcha.
All right, ready? All right, you ready? All right. Welcome to The Uncomfortable Truth, where we answer the questions we all should be asking about race and racism in America. I'm Loki Mulholland.
And I'm LeVon Brown.
And it's time to get uncomfortable. Hey, we got it right this time.
Yeah,
that wasn't too bad. I'll have to clean it up later. That's good. All right. In the 1950s and 60s, urban renewal was the buzzword for the revitalization of economically neglected neighborhoods. However, the bulldozers always seemed to demolish the neighborhoods of color. The redevelopment of slums displaced Black families with no care where they went. None of this was by accident. The history of policies from the GI Bill and redlining to white flight and the jobs that moved with them to the suburbs continue to impede any hope of economic mobility for African Americans. And for many, today's gentrification doesn't look much different. Today, I'm, of course, joined by my co-host, freedom writer LeVon Brown. LeVon, how you doing?
All right, Loki, how are you?
Doing pretty good. Well, I know we already had a little bit of introductions and conversations here with Renee, but we're also joined by our guest, Reverend Renee Kessler, who is the current president of the Beck Cultural Exchange Center in Knoxville, Tennessee, and a lifelong resident and activist in her beloved city, which lost the heart of their Black community to urban renewal many years ago and are now trying to restore that history once more. Now, so welcome, Renee.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here with you. I'm honored.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Finally get to see you again. I've past several years I've been able to be in Knoxville for the August 8th, which is Knoxville's Juneteenth.
Right.
And we've been able to spend that time there doing screenings of different films. And this year with COVID, it didn't happen. But
Yeah, we had to do it virtually without you, Loki, and it just didn't feel the same. It didn't seem the same, so we'll have to make up. And, Mr. Brown was supposed to be here a couple years ago, so he has a date in Knoxville still, and we're going to hold him to it. I figure if I throw it on the podcast, it's recorded, so that means he's got to come. Throwing it out there.
Yeah.
All right.
Now, Levon, your friend Jimmy, that's James Baldwin to us mortals, called urban renewal Negro Removal.
Right.
In cities large and small across the country, the poor, and in particular African Americans, were losing their homes and neighborhoods. Today, many people might think this was merely the tearing down of old buildings and constructing new ones, adding parks and such. However, in Knoxville, there was another element in play, the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, which gave states and federal governments complete control over the construction of new highways and off-ramps and such. Not only were these escape routes for white flight, but they were drawn up to run right through Black neighborhoods. And that's part of what happened in Knoxville. Renee, can you give us a little bit of history behind urban renewal in Knoxville in particular?
Yeah, so Loki, while urban renewal was not unique to Knoxville, as you mentioned, it was happening all over the country because it's a federal program. And it's not undifferent. It's not unlike what was happening all over the country. What was happening in Knoxville is not unique. It was happening all over in urban communities, predominantly with people of Black and brown skin. And as a result of it, there was this displacement, right, of not only Black people, but Black places, Black culture, Black things, a significant part of our history. Specifically in Knoxville, it's going to take place from 1959 to 1974. And really, the Black Culture Exchange Center, of which I am the president of, is a result of urban renewal. So we're going to become an organization or an institution because the people begin to get together after urban renewal is over and say, well, if we don't begin to preserve and conserve this history, these stories, it's almost going to be as though these people and indeed these places never existed. And so hence the Black Culture Exchange Center, they begin to bring all of their memorabilia, their pictures, their photographs, their memories here to the Beck Center. And then we'll become the African American History and Culture Center of this region. And absent of us, there's no single African American History or Culture Center doing what we do. So if we don't tell you these stories, you don't know they existed. And it's the same way all over the country. But what's interesting about urban renewal in Knoxville, as I said 1959 to 1974, but the reality of it is, and this is what people tell me when I ask people who lived urban renewal, because we know that there's one thing you can hear about history and read about history in the history books and in the newspapers, or you can talk to people who lived history, and you're always going to get a different story. So when I talk to those people who lived urban renewal, and to your point, James Baldwin called it Negro Removal in Knoxville, the act was actually signed, the HUD Housing and Urban Renewal Development Act was actually signed in 1949. And this is important because the people tell me this. They say, Renee, 1959 to 1974 is when the first building came down in 1959. That is not when urban renewal came. Because remember, the act started in 1949. And so they'll give me an example. They'll say, for example, there's a school, and they'll say, this school goes to sixth grade. It's an elementary school that goes to the sixth grade in 1949. 1950, sixth grade. After 1950, those sixth graders graduate, the school goes to fifth grade. They never replace those sixth graders. 1951, the school goes, when those fifth graders leave, it goes to fourth grader. The next year, the students leave, it goes to third grade. The kids are starting to get anxious. What's happening to my school? The people start to get anxious. What's happening to our neighborhood? What's happening to our community? Something's changing. So long before the first building is torn down, the psyche is torn down. So Black people know something is coming. You get the fear put in you because something is coming, and you know there's nothing you can do to stop it. And I believe, particularly as it goes with school systems and things like that, as they begin to go down, so goes the community. And again, that's exactly what happens. So once it gets to the point where that school is a one class, one level school before it's finally torn down in 1959.
Did they put anything in this place?
So urban renewal is, numerically speaking, it's going to displace nearly 3,000 families, predominantly African-American families, 107 African-American owned businesses, and 15 churches. Of all of those businesses that were relocated or replaced or placed somewhere else, only one is going to survive to this day, Urban Renewal, and it's Jornigan and Son Mortuary. It's a mortuary. Now, interestingly enough, it wasn't the only mortuary, so it's not like, well, there was only one. There were upwards of 5, 6, 7 mortuaries at that time throughout the community. So it is the only one that was able to move and survive. And the big deal with Urban Renewal, it did displace people and family and places and uprooted them and then placed them where they need you to be. Again, to Loki's opening comments, where the interstate will now come in, because in Knoxville, in downtown Knoxville, you have where the Black community was, you have the major interstate highway that came in, I-40 and 75. And then specifically, Knoxville is very unique because it's one of the very few cities where you have 75 and 40, which 40 goes east to west, 75 goes north to south. They cross in Knoxville. So it's a major thoroughfare to get anywhere in the country. So yeah, that was a very important part of our transit system that came into play right here in Knoxville. So that's going to be the heart of the Black community. And so once that goes away, the biggest issue among issues with urban renewal was because under Title I Housing Act of 1949, there was no relocation package money. And that's very important because today, under eminent domain, for example, according to the law, if the government comes in and says, we're going to take your property for the greater good or interstates or whatever is going to improve the public spaces or places, then they have to make you whole, right? They have to give you the fair market value for your property, sort of negotiate with you on that. And then they have to give you a relocation package, sort of make you whole so that you can transition and go to wherever it is you're going to relocate and be able to do that. That was not the law in 1949. So when they come in and they, assess your property, that's pretty much it. So let's think about all of the inherent issues that are going to come up with that. If you come in and say, my property is just worth this, well, maybe it is sitting on this plot of land at this point to you, but the reality of it is I've retrofitted to make it work for me. And I don't know that I can purchase that or have that in another community. And then let's talk about the businesses. Businesses were concentrated in the Black community. Why? Because we know Jim Crow. We're coming off post-Reconstruction. We're coming out of the Jim Crow era. Black, we have the Great Migration north. So we're in a segregated South. So of course you're going to have Black businesses because you've got a ready-made community. And so all of the businesses are going to come as a result of the need for Black folks to be able to go to the grocery store, shop in places where they can. So you create these establishments. Well, when you take these establishments away, you've now messed up my base. Now, how do I get these products to my community, to my base? Because now it's dispersed out. And then and then financially, how do I do it? And keep in mind, this is also very important. The house dubbed as more than just the place where we live. We know that Black people have always been ingenious with how they can take something and make nothing. And so the house dubbed as not only the place where they lived and slept, but it was also the business, right?
So what was the argument when urban renewal came? And obviously, like you said, Black families knew, wait a second, this interstate's coming right through our neighborhood. Of course, the white argument is, well, it's got to be put somewhere. And it's like, well, why our neighborhood? Why can't it be your neighborhood?
Well, and I think, many suburban white Americans were coming back into downtown. They were beginning to own cars. People were starting to travel more. So the interstate system became very important, and it's prime real estate. And as well as I know, even with gentrification, it's prime real estate. We don't understand sometimes how valuable the land is that we're on until someone comes and buys it for $1 and then sells it for 100,
right.
200,000. So,
but you can still put it through a white neighborhood. Or divide it up a little bit, at least, try to make it balanced and stuff. So why does this always seem to be, happening in Black neighborhoods where?
Well, I don't know why it happened in your neighborhood, but in many of the places it was due to housing. They needed the land for housing. In Chicago, the Black neighborhood was in and around Lake Michigan. And eventually that property became very expensive, very, very much desired. There was a lot of it, and they had to move us, so they moved us. But that's what was going on in a lot of areas. We were on expensive property, and a lot of areas it was because it became needed. So they just told people you're going to move. So it depended on where you were, what the cause was for moving you. Like she just said, Renee just said, about the interstate. I don't know if they could have put it somewhere else, but I think the issue is not so much that they moved people, but they weren't compensated at all.
Right.
So essentially what happened to them was what happened all over the South, whether it was renewal or not.
And
they took the land.
And one of the things to tie into to think about that as well is the fact that, if we're looking at 1949, looking at the 1950s, African Americans couldn't vote. So they were going to have a say in it anyways.
Well, and I think that what's happening is, particularly in the act, first of all, it's important to remember that urban renewal, again, I know what my thought was, I was going to say with James Baldwin. He says Negro Removal. In Knoxville, we call it urban removal. But suffice it to say, the act, urban renewal's intention was to remove blight and slum. And so I want to keep that in mind. And there was blight and slum in many of these urban areas, indeed all over the country. If you look at some of those Black neighborhoods, there was blight and slum there. We know that. And yes, we needed some revitalization because remember, we're in the poorest area of the community. So this was supposed to revitalize. That's the thing, is it was supposed to be a good thing. It was supposed to come in and revitalize. And don't get me wrong, and we tell the whole story. There was blight and slum, and we needed some revitalizations in many of our urban communities throughout the country, no doubt. But what we want to say is that the wrecking ball went too far. You came and took the good, the bad, and the other. You took everything, because the Carnegie Library is not blight and slum, the only Black library that we had. Dr. James H. Presnell had a mansion, the Becks had a mansion. So we know that even though urban renewal was about blight and slum, it went much further than that. So I think, to add to your answer to your question, Loki, these areas for sure qualify based on some of these areas that had blight and slum. And I'm sure Mr. Brown can talk about some of those areas as well that did need help. I mean, we're talking about some very challenging sections of our community. But again, we can also talk about the very nice, stable communities that they took, the very good businesses that they took, the very good institutions and churches that they took.
I think we didn't, when the whole, renewal stuff was going on, we didn't know what to ask for. We meaning Black people. So when they came in and started tearing stuff down, we're different people than we are now. So we ask questions and we say, well, why are you doing this, or why this place? But if you think about it, the same thing happened in New York, actually, I guess all over the place, when they closed up the mental institutions, right? The theory was they were going to be replaced by smaller units that did the same thing in the neighborhood. Well, that never happened. So right now we have a lot of homeless people because they don't have anywhere else to go, and many of them need institutions to go to. But I for one was one of those people that said, close them down, under the theory that they were going to rebuild smaller units. And I think what happened to they didn't care about Black people anyway. And we ended up being where nobody else wanted to be. When the state needed that, it just said, move. And without asking the question why or where to, we just moved. Right. And if you think about a school going from 6th grade to 1st grade, and now you're going to start asking questions, it's too late. But people didn't know they could. Matter of fact, in many cases they could not, and if they did, they didn't get an answer. But they didn't know what they know now.
Yeah. Well, and again, I come back to the expense. It's like this urban renewal, this massive investment of resources into improving neighborhoods. Again, it's to America's benefit at the expense of African Americans. I mean, this story sounds familiar.
Mm-hmm.
It is. It's all,
what's that, Levon?
it's all over. It's what they do when they want to build a garbage processing plant. It's all in the neighborhoods of poor people.
Mm-hmm.
It's in that neighborhood because people don't do anything until it's too late.
Mm-hmm.
Even now, when they target neighborhoods, it's a little late because we don't own the land. 9 times out of 10 we're renting.
Mm-hmm.
So the people that own the land, they make more money if we move out. So they don't care at all. Well, now people might, you might have some white people in there because now they're just, land is certainly in New York. It's very expensive. Well, it used to be until COVID hit, but it was very expensive to do stuff. But we didn't vote, so they didn't count us. We weren't involved in the politics of the locality, so they didn't pay attention. We didn't have anybody on the boards. We didn't have anybody to tell us what was happening. We didn't have anybody to speak for us. And that's why they were able to get away with it. Now, they didn't have to use the gun anymore. They used the vote. In the old days. In the 50s and the 40s, they might, depending on where you were, they would kill you. But they didn't have to do that anymore because we didn't have any representation. And we didn't get the benefit.
Yeah.
First of all, we couldn't afford the benefit because as soon as they started building something else, they started charging more for it. So there was no way for us to afford it. So we just sat there and, did a few old my lords, and then it was over, it was done.
Well, and we're seeing this today. Gentrification to many is the new Negro removal, right? White families move in, coffee shops pop up, Black families are forced to move out as the cost of living there becomes too high. And that's the soul of the neighborhood's lost. And the reason many whites move in is because they want to be in more diversified neighborhoods and get to a point where but then you get to a point where there's no people of color anyways.
Because they can't afford it.
Can't afford it. But how, and the government continues to play a role in that because as they look to improve neighborhoods with more parks, clean up the waterfronts, allow investors to reclaim old warehouses, we've seen that improve public transportation, more whites want to move in. And then you get the medical and research universities that have played a substantial role in this. In the year 2000, 3.6% of the neighborhood around Howard University was white. By 2010, it was over 25%. And that's when the trouble began, as those who came in didn't respect the grounds of the university. So I think it was just, in 2019 when this issue, came to a head. So the Yard, which is on the grounds of the private historical Black college of Howard University, was starting to be used as a dog walk by white residents who oftentimes didn't even clean up after their dogs.
Yeah.
And the perception of entitlement and disrespect quickly escalated. Gail Anderson Holness, Howard University law student alum and a former chair of the ANC, noted, quote, "We welcome all new people. Just remember you're coming into someone's neighborhood. If someone comes into my house, for example, they have to adapt to my rules." Now, some would say, well, look, I bought my house. It's just as much my neighborhood as yours. You don't like it because just because I'm white, and that's not my fault. So quit discriminating against me because of the color of my skin. So with gentrification, it's a whole new dynamic, because it's an interesting dynamic to me, at least. Because there's a flip side of this, because now, of course, if Black people start moving into white neighborhoods, well, there's going to be an issue. We don't want too many of them, right? So is this just kind of the same thing where, we got white neighborhoods and we have Black neighborhoods, and well, shouldn't we just have neighborhoods?
Well, we should.
Right.
But that's not, unfortunately, in many places, that's not what happens.
But so then when white people move into a traditionally black neighborhood, suddenly
One
something's
of
happening.
one of two things happen when that starts to happen. Either well, first of all, everybody gets protective because nobody knows it. Nobody knows the next guy. So the black people don't know the white people don't know the black people. And the assumption is, because historically it's been true, that if white people start moving in, black people are going to move out because they can't afford it. That's changed somewhat and in some areas, but it tends to be true. The problem is we always attack the problem up here, and the problem started before that. Because why can't all black families afford it? Why can't they afford what the white families can afford?
Mm-hmm.
If they choose to live there, why can't they? And the reason is because of the jobs they have, because of what, it's further down the road that the problem starts. And we're always fighting, too far away from the real problem. What they say is true, that we can't afford it.
Right.
But there are black people who can. So that's one of the things that happen. The other is everybody gets defensive. Black people get defensive, white people get defensive, right? Because as a black person, you're saying, I would rather be around other black people. Why, I don't know, but that's what people say. When you're white, it's I'd rather be around other white people. And all of it's both groups are taking that position because they don't know the other.
Mm.
White people don't know black people don't know white people. And did I just say the same thing? But you understand? That's part of what goes on now.
Right.
That's not what went on before. They should just take the land.
Well, what's interesting around Howard is that you had the middle class black students and faculty who actually really also didn't have a harmonious relationship with more blue collar black residents either.
Right. Well, that makes sense.
And this sniffs of classism.
Yes.
But suddenly when white people started moving in, more, a larger percentage of the neighborhood became white, not predominantly white, but a larger percentage. Classism almost went out the door. Now it became a us versus them. This is, the class might have been there in respects of blue collar and middle class, but at least it was black.
Right. The thing we have to ask ourselves is, why do we think that's better? Where I live, there are black families, there are white families. They didn't want the black families to move in at first. They found that the price of the house didn't go down. The value of the neighborhood didn't go down.
Mm-hmm.
There's still a lot of black people that if you meet them and talk to them, they put this neighborhood down because there's not enough black people here.
Right.
Right. So you're going to go to the white politicians and you're going to say, there's not enough black people there. Well, and they will tell you, well, it's not my fault. Right. We're not stopping. I live in an area that doesn't stop you from moving in if it's a black neighborhood or if it's a white neighborhood. It's up to you. If you can get in, but there are some exceptions. There are neighborhoods that you couldn't pay me to move into. But normally they don't do that. So part of it is about money, and part of it is just about we're not used to those people, or we are used to them, and they're going to do things to us.
Right.
So before they do that, I'm going to move out, or I'm going to get some more people to move in. The white people are thinking the same way.
Yeah.
It's just that more white people have good jobs and can afford that, and black people don't.
Well, there was an interesting article in Vice a couple of years ago about gentrification, and it explored this idea that the author found that there was this level of what was called moral disengagement. So what you had was these morally woke whites who saw themselves as part of the neighborhood, that they were connected to it, right? But when push came to shove, they were able. It's like they didn't actually see themselves as part of the problem of the gentrification because they were the good neighbors.
Right.
So there's a section I want to read. This is quite interesting. So there were common threads throughout the interviews. This author did. It says, Bed-Stuy's history is what attracted many of my respondents to the neighborhood. They liked the diversity and the grit of the neighborhood, but acknowledged that the area was changing and expressed guilt for their own role in the process. But then that moral disengagement kicked in. Interviewees differentiated themselves from the stereotypical disengaged gentrifier by presenting themselves as good neighbors. They described charming stoop conversations with longtime residents and often spoke in an over-the-top praiseworthy manner about neighbors who they hardly knew. For example, a respondent I called Jonathan told me that he felt more connected to the people in Bed-Stuy than any previous neighborhood he lived in. When I asked him to give me a few examples, he mentioned bodega owners, dry cleaners, and a woman on the corner with an immaculate garden whose name he did not know. And so to me, one of the interesting things is that the people who are moving in, who are the liberal mindset to want to be engaged in the neighborhood, are also part of the problem in respects of escalating the property value. So in Bed-Stuy in 1980, Bed-Stuy in Brooklyn was 5% white and the rent was like $580 a month. By 2019, the rent was $2,000 a month and the white population was over 17%.
Even if you kept the population, even if you did all of that and they were the best neighbors in the world, they think, here's the problem. They don't get to know the people. They say, hello, Sam, but Sam may like his music loud, or Sam may like the party, or Sam may like, they want everybody to be like them. If they're not, they get nervous.
Right.
I don't care what they say, that's what goes on. So as long as we adopt what the white majority wants to have, they're okay. They're not afraid. They get nervous when we want to have parties. We invite them to parties. They feel like they're not a part of that. We invite them. They want everything like it was in the old neighborhood, or what they believe the neighborhood should be like. And therein lies the problem. Okay? Because I, as a Black person, don't want to, actually, we as Black people take on that ourselves. So we don't want to be too loud. We don't want to be too, we want to wear the right clothes so that we are welcome. And that's what people resent. Without saying it, that's what people resent.
Right. So this Black neighborhood allows African Americans to just be themselves, not necessarily have to conform to the whiteness standards, so whites don't feel threatened and so forth. And now suddenly you have white people moving in trying to change that neighborhood
so that they don't
make it comfortable for them.
That's it.
All right. So like I said, I've been to Knoxville several times. I actually really enjoy Knoxville. And one of the things that was interesting that was happening in Bed-Stuy, one of the defensive measures taking place to deflect their complicity was they were talking about how diverse the neighborhoods were, although it was already diverse. They talked about new restaurants and such that were bringing in money into the neighborhoods. This revitalization of the downtown where those who originally lived there actually couldn't even afford to eat there.
Right.
That made me think of, Renee, it made me think of Knoxville and Gay Street, for example. All the construction going on. When I was there in, 2019, all these restaurants are popping up and everything is going good, on Gay Street and Market Square. But who can afford to eat there? And not necessarily that Gay Street was the main hub, but all that money is going into like the Tennessee Theater, but right down the street is the
Well, so downtown Knoxville, and really that is the area on the other side of Gay Street, just right in what we call the Old City now, block from where you stay in the hotel. That was the Black community. And so that's where all the Black business district was. That's where the Black houses and businesses were. That's where the heart of the interstate is, right there.
Where the hotel is?
So where your hotel is, go one block and you're in what they call So as I come up to get you on Gay Street, the street that runs parallel, used to be Central Avenue.
Right.
So you have Gay Street that runs, and that's the Black business district, all of that, and pre-urban renewal. And that's the interstate system right there, which is all the homes and all that. So where you are is all African Americans in downtown Knoxville. And so the reality of it is, so that's what got uprooted. And it spread its tentacles out further. So they began to push Black people east, right, into these neighborhoods. And so today, you know, the hood where I live in is 2 miles from where you are in downtown Knoxville, because it's like on the other side of the railroad tracks, if you will. I was born and raised in the house I live in right now was from 8 years old. I moved to the county and raised my kids for about 20 years, but I always kept the house that we grew up in. When I grew up, it was different. We lived in the projects before, of course, but then when you move back and you're in the hood now. That's the hood, that's the Black hood. And I kept the home place in the hood. I live in the hood and I'm being gentrified. I live in a place where all of my neighbors were Black as I was growing up. And now today, I have almost an entire side of the street where there are more white people across the street from me than Black people. And that was never the case. So you always know, because here's what I want to say. I don't think there's anything wrong with having neighborhoods or community where people look alike, right? Because people like to go in places where we enjoy the same culture, we have some of the same identity, we identify with each other. I don't think there's anything wrong with people living wherever they choose to live, wherever they're comfortable, particularly if they're in a neighborhood or in a community where the culture is what they embrace, right? So Black people have a certain culture. You know, we do family reunions in the backyard and picnics on Saturday and all of these kinds of things where the family, everybody comes, and you're welcome to come on over in the yard, you know, and everybody grew up, everybody knew each other, the neighbors knew the kids, you know, that's how we grew up. And that hood watched out for the children. So there was something special about living in a place where it was a village. And I think that that's the old way we grew up. And there was nothing wrong with that. And so I think that today, here is my challenge and my frustration. I want to live in a neighborhood where there are sidewalks, right? I want to live in a neighborhood where there are street lights and I feel safe and the kids can play outside like we did when we grew up and not be afraid of gunfire and drug dealers and cars speeding down the highway, down the street. I want to grow up in a neighborhood where the stores are right on the corner and we can walk to the grocery store. We can walk to I want to live in a neighborhood like that. My neighborhood went down such that that wasn't the way it was, but you always know when it's going to be gentrified because all of a sudden you get streets, lights. I remember going outside the first time a few years ago and I kept thinking a car was coming down the street. So I kept waiting at the stop sign. Like I'm waiting for this car to come down. And I suddenly realized it's a street light. I go, where'd that come from? And it's so bright. I think it's a car's light about to come up because I've never noticed that before. Well, why did we all of a sudden get street lights? Wow, we got the sidewalks repaved. Well, why did we just get the sidewalk? Wow, the corridor coming down Magnolia has been revamped and there's flowers in the middle of the street with little paveways. Here they come. I wanted that. I don't need white people to move into my neighborhood to have those amenities that I would have liked to have had before. I want the same things that every other family wants, and that is the safe neighborhoods for kids to play outside with street lights and sidewalks. Unfortunately, in Black neighborhoods, you only get it when gentrification comes, it feels like.
But why is that? I mean, what is going on there? That's the city that's making those investments in the neighborhoods.
And that's exactly right. So the sad thing is those investments don't get made because here's the deal. I have to let it go down all the way because then I buy it for $1. Then I can bring it back. And so the reality of it is there's a cycle that happens. And unfortunately, when the neighborhood starts going down, many times, many of our families, our older families who understand ownership pass on and the kids can barely make ends meet. The next thing you know, they've lost the home. Home is a big deal. When you don't have ownership and you're a renter, you now have no voice. So you're in the property. So you think that you're living in a house that you grew up in. You think you're living in a neighborhood you grew up. It is not your neighborhood anymore because you don't own it. You're renting, and they're just waiting for the right time to come in, and then they're going to take your property. So going back to Mr. Brown's comments about we can't afford it. So what happens is, way people buy up all these properties, we don't even know who the owners are. You know, we talk about these slumlords and all these things, but they hold it for the right time. And then when they're ready to come back, then they come in, and again, now they can do whatever they want to do in terms of fixing up because you own it. But keep in mind, they make decisions on that neighborhood, right? So even though the neighborhood looks black, it's white owned, which means they're making decisions on that neighborhood that you don't even have a voice at the table. If you don't own it, you don't have a voice. So we have a homeowners association that's meeting, talking about putting historic overlays on the community. Well, if you put a historic overlay on a black community, you just ousted half the community. I can't afford to get my house up to historic overlay codes because number one, I can't, look at here, it's all I can do to just replace the window. If you tell me now I got to replace it with the historic window and put the coatings up, I can't do that. And so our senior citizens are being displaced and all of those. So it's a rippling effect.
But they know that. They know that. They'll put those historic overlays on there just as a tactic to move black people out of those neighborhoods. You know, I think, you know, when you said that black people rent the homes they think they own. It's not their neighborhood because the white people own those neighborhoods. In Levon, I instantly went to the Smith Robertson Museum down at the end of Lynch Street.
This is Ferris Street you're talking about, right?
Ferris Street, thank you. Yeah, Ferris Street. In that neighborhood in Jackson, which is just all old shotgun shacks. It's the most blighted neighborhood in Jackson. Burned out. I mean, even the police, the fire department in that neighborhood is actually burned out. The fire department, that's how bad it is. But there are new houses going up that look like mini plantation homes. It's bizarre.
Well, that's the historical black neighborhood for business.
Right.
And I don't know, when I was there, they were going, oh, you were there when I was there the first time. There was the restaurant that Pearls that opened up when I was there. It closed and it was opening again. I don't know if it finally made it or not, but that's the historical district.
Right.
And there were only two places on that street. One was that one. The other was the place that sold that made itself famous by selling the pig ears. You could be able to get sandwiches, but that's all that was. Now I think a lot of it's still black owned, but they're not gonna, you know.
Yeah,
it's a historical district, but we can't afford it. I don't know who owns it.
But the streets look real nice. And on Ferris Street, going through that district, the buildings are all boarded up. But then you get to the end of Ferris Street, and again, I said Lynch Street, but it was Ferris Street. You get to the end of the Smith Robertson Museum,
right,
where Richard Wright went to school, right?
There used to be a school, right?
And everything around there is so blighted.
I think the thing with gentrification and urban renewal, whatever, because we all want to live in good neighborhoods with good people. We don't, you know, that doesn't know any color. Good people, we all want to live in safe neighborhoods with good people and good neighbors and where we look out for each other. That's a beloved community, and that's the idea. But the reality of it is, with gentrification and with urban renewal, it was about displacement. That's what I want people to understand. When you have to displace people, and these people are disproportionately Black, we just did an injustice. So downtown now, I'm excited about a lot of the developments that's happening downtown and the baseball field coming back and all of these developments, because it's not displacing anybody. It's putting in development, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. I'm grateful for that, because hopefully our neighborhoods and our communities can be beneficiaries from some of that economic development that's coming in that's still a predominantly Black community. I want us to think about gentrification and urban renewal, and I want us to remember displacement. If you have to move Black people or reroute back businesses or take out them to put in, something's wrong with that. Now, if you're coming in and you're redeveloping and you're adding to God be the glory. But I want us to always think about it in the sense of displacing. When we start displacing, and that number is disproportionately Black folks and low-income families and individuals, we just did an injustice.
Here, let me try this, because what happens is, let's assume that the city or the landowners didn't do anything, right? And they want to change the neighborhood. So you're asking for public funds to change the neighborhood because the people that are living there can't afford it or aren't spending the money. So, and most of them want to live among people like themselves. What is the answer to that? If you're the landowner, or maybe the black family sold out, they sold out to somebody, we don't know who, but the bottom line is you're going to the town and you're saying, spend money here, and I want nothing but black people here. How do we solve that problem? Because I know neighborhoods, by the way, that are all black, but they're wealthy. You go to Martha's Vineyard, there's a whole section of Martha's Vineyard that is all black. They don't want other black people who cannot afford that to come there, up to and including the First Lady, by the way. So what do people do? How can we make things happen?
Well, I think, first of all, I'm a recovering banker before I was a preacher. And here,
that's a combination.
I mentioned that because I want to talk about redlining, right? And I want to talk about loans and things like that from the banking world, because we understand that a large part of the Black communities, a large part of these affluent communities were all designed, right? And they were designed through code. So literally the banks, in the government would literally draw on a map, a color code. And depending on who was living in those neighborhoods is what color you got, right? And your green neighborhoods, you got this is where the grass is green. This is where your white collar workers are. This is where the housing side. We're going to lend this level of money in here, and we're going to invest in this neighborhood. And this is a good investment, right? And then the blue, it's good, not the great, but it's good. And then as you go down, and of course into the red, the yellow caution, it's going down because it's getting too many people of color. It's, and then you get to the Black neighborhood, it's red. Do not lend in those neighborhoods. It's poor neighborhoods, it's poor communities, it's Black people. The housing stock's not worth it. The values are not there. So therefore, that is not one. So now we don't have access to funds. We don't have access to lending, capital. We don't have money to build the houses, to fix up the houses when they go down. We can't get home equity loans. None of that. That was all part of a systematic racism. When we talk about systemic racism, that's systemic racism. That was built into the system, right? That doesn't go away overnight. And whether we want to accept it or not, there's still a code. And so whether the code is written on a map today and whether we call it redline or not, there are neighborhoods that we have intentionally allowed to go down, intentionally not put insurance on, and intentionally not given the values of what they were, and they've gone down. And now if people can't get the houses fixed up and they're about to fall down and they fall in, they gotta find a place to live, right? And then if a renter can come in there, if you can have somebody else have to take care of that, and you can just come in and rent it, well, I can still live in my neighborhood. I don't own it, but I can at least still live here. And I can rent it, and somebody else has got to fix it up for me, right? So that's what you think. So it's still part of this system that we allowed, that in our community, in our country, was allowed to disenfranchise people. And unfortunately, we are still having the reverberating effects of that. It doesn't go away, and it doesn't just end, and it doesn't just happen overnight. We're talking generations of Black people who still have to suffer through all of that. And by the grace of God, we are where we are, that we can afford to do those things. But so I don't think you can underappreciate a systemic racist system that has literally built into itself a system where Black people were not able to really be a part of the great American dream, and that's unfortunate. So that's our challenge.
And there's something interesting that keeps coming to mind is we don't really celebrate Black neighborhoods. So we'll have, Chinatown, Little Italy, and those sort of places. And you never hear about gentrification of Chinatown or Little Italy, right? We want to preserve that. but suddenly, Black neighborhoods seem to be the core of that idea of gentrification. I just find that interesting. I mean,
one correction, we don't have many of those neighborhoods, but for instance, Harlem to this day is still known as a Black neighborhood. As a matter of fact, buses used to go there from France and stuff to eat and stuff like that. The other thing that's happening is you go to Harlem now, and there are a whole bunch of houses that are now being bought, fixed up. The house that cost $100,000 a few years ago is now $500,000. And there was always a part of it that Black people owned, predominantly Black, maybe one or two white families, but they were always middle class and upper middle class, a neighborhood in Harlem, because I learned that when I was teaching there. And so there are, it's not what it used to be, because what it used to be, all those houses in Harlem were secondary homes for the people that lived in Manhattan. Central Park was a Black neighborhood, but Harlem itself is still known as that. Frank Sinatra used to go there. All the top musicians used to go there. They used to run nightclubs. The nightclubs that they used to run initially were for all white people, but Black people ran them.
Right.
So but there are very few of those neighborhoods where that happens. You're right. But I do, Harlem is one of those neighborhoods that's still predominantly Black.
Yeah, no, and that's for certain. But I guess to me, it's I look at different areas and we think about Black neighborhoods, and instantly when you say Black neighborhood, there's an association economically with that.
There is.
And the gentrification that comes with that.
Yeah, there is.
I think when I think about our neighborhoods and our community and racial justice, I think about opportunities, right? Justice for all people, right? And I think it starts with neighborhoods, because here's the deal. Look at the school systems. Many of our kids in urban communities, we got issues with our school system. And as the school system goes down, the neighborhoods go down. So goes the school, so goes the neighborhood. I started this conversation with Urban Renewal with a school intentionally, because everything is built around schools. So think about it. When you think about neighborhoods, particularly when people think about moving into a neighborhood or moving into community, they're thinking about, well, what's the school system like? Where are my kids going to go to school and all this? Because that's important. And then you find, oh my goodness, well, the good school systems are down here or West Knoxville or South Side, Chicago, whatever that may be. So yeah, I get steered down here because if you want good school system, so you're already saying if you want a good neighborhood, then you have to go over here. Well, everybody wants a good neighborhood. Everybody wants a good school system where their kids can get good education and have the proper resources. So I think when we think about gentrification and when we think about urban renewal, I think it's fair for us to learn some things from it. And these are the key things that I really feel like are important. Are we displacing people? And when we move in, are those resources available for all people? Are we infusing capital back into our school systems, into our kids, into our neighborhoods, or are we just moving them out and displacing them? Because if we are, that is wrong. That is injustice. But if you genuinely want to come into a neighborhood, no matter what color you are, because you want to be part of a neighborhood's, part of its potential to be great, and this is where you want to live and you want to invest in it, we need that, because we need people to move into our communities and have investment dollars. I just don't want my community to suffer because in order for it to be that way, others have to move in. As a community, the city, the county, and everyone else, those public dollars, those public resources that we have should be disseminated based on the areas and communities they're in. So for example, much of the federal dollars that you're going to get in a city or municipality is going to be based on your income levels and your areas of low income and poverty, right? So you're going to get federal dollars based on revitalization areas, empowerment zones, whatever that is, you're getting them off the backs of poor people. So make sure the money goes back into those communities of those poor people, because that's where the money is derived from. But what happens is, we know all too often cities write reports and they go out and they get these federal dollars and they come back and they never see the very neighborhoods that really were how they got the money to begin with.
Yeah, I want to reiterate that point. That's so people understand what you just said. The cities get this money to revitalize neighborhoods based on these poor neighborhoods. You know, here's this infusion, we're going to revitalize it, but the very neighborhoods and the very people who should be benefiting from that never actually do.
However, you don't even get it, except that you have these numbers
Right.
that say this is where you are. And we know it's the same thing with school systems. You talk about the Title I money and all that kind of stuff. They're supposed to get this money because you're in a school with a predominantly low income, but we know the resources are not equitable. So I don't, I just think that's real.
Well, and part of the argument comes back, is to this, is you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. I mean, if we don't invest in these neighborhoods, well, then you just don't care. And when you do invest into it, what's going to happen is that people are going to want to move in. Howard University, actually, when they began to reinvest in some of the properties in their area, they increased the value and thus kind of help usher in this gentrification.
I think we're in a great place right now in our country. I know it seems overwhelming, but I'm always this positive, over-exertive optimist, in that in the middle of two historical pandemics, a racial pandemic and a health pandemic, we have an opportunity, I believe, to really say and believe what we say. We can infuse capital in neighborhoods and communities that have been disproportionately disenfranchised for Black and Brown people, and help infuse those investments and those resources into those Black businesses that have not had an opportunity or resources to do that kind of development. So if we really believe that we want to live in a community, in a country, in a world where we eradicate racism, then we begin to infuse capital in these Black and Brown communities and in these Black and Brown businesses and women-owned businesses who have had to compete at an unfair level against their majority counterparts for contracts, for bids that they can't compete with. So we have a golden opportunity now to really say, if we're being intentional about being anti-racist, you know what, let's look at a system that was systemically, disproportionately geared against Black people and say, okay, well then let's really make the playing field level, and let's infuse capital and resources into Black and Brown businesses, Black and Brown communities, Black and Brown people, and let's level that playing field so that now we can say we live in a world where everybody has an opportunity to be great.
I agree with you. The last place that tried that was Harvard University. They're now being sued by the very minority that they tried to help.
Well, I think that I believe by faith that if we do what's right, it's always the right time to do what's right. But I think now more than ever is a golden opportunity. If you, and when I say you, I mean individuals, right? Not the government. Yeah, the government's got a role to play and legislature have roles to play, but I am saying to individual people, to businesses, to business owners, we are the power and strength of our country. And so if individuals and individual companies and organizations and agencies and people who genuinely have a commitment to what justice looks like really began to stand up and say, here's how we're going to do it, I think we change this world. And I just believe that we have to stop waiting on, the government or anything else to do that. We have an opportunity as we the people to do that. And I think there are good people who didn't know how, for example, how do I change? How do I make a difference? How do I invest? On both sides. And I think we're having conversations today that I think good people could hear and listen to. And I think that we have a moment where we might be able to truly make a difference, where we look back in the history books and say, wow, they figured it out.
Well, that's where the COVID virus was good, because it got all kinds of people interested in all kinds of things where they were not interested before. And what we need to do now is enough to make sure people stay interested in changing and fixing, that we don't go back to the old ways, that we figure out new ways to do things.
Absolutely. And I believe history is the great truth teller. I say this all the time. You know, nothing new under the sun. Everything that's happened has already happened before. We don't know history, so we don't learn from it, and we aren't able to build from it and make it a better place. Because the truth of the matter is, we had a double pandemic, as we know, in 1918 and 1919. We had the Spanish flu at the same time. We had the largest race riots in our country's history during the Red Summer of 1919. Both were happening at the very same time. This is nothing new. It happened. The issue is, what did we learn from that? What did we learn? And what's the takeaway from that? Because we're finding ourselves right back in the middle of it again.
I think what's different this time is we're doing it together. In other words, that people are coming out and saying, wait a minute, I didn't know that, or I didn't know that, or so you have white people, you have black people, you have brown people, you have red people, you have all kinds of people now saying, wait a minute, this is not going to work the way I thought it was. I can, you know, black people are 13% of the population. Indians will have their percentage, whatever that is. So everybody is looking out not for themselves anymore. They're looking to change how we live. We didn't do that back in 1919. We didn't do that during Red Summer, but we're doing it now because everything is happening to everybody. I really believe that. I think that's what's going on, that people are willing to listen now, and black people are not willing to run. They're willing to change things. White people are willing to help them.
I'm an eternal optimist. You know, as heavy as my heart is right now, every day we wake up and turn on the news and there's another, you know, issue where a black man has been shot, an unarmed black man has been accosted by the police. You know, every day we turn on, that's heavy, right? That's hard. And every day I'm heavy and I'm overwhelmed, and I have to turn away from it because it's almost too much for me. But at the same time, and that may be the preacher in me, I am very much hopeful that we're in a season and in the moment, to your point, Mr. Brown, where people are wanting to have a conversation and talk, and then translate that conversation into action, and right. Action into impact. And I'm hopeful for that. And I believe that there are more good people than not. And I believe inside all of us is the good. We just have to, like Alex Haley said, we have to find the good and celebrate it. So finding the good and being able to have that hard, uncomfortable, low-key conversation, and being okay with allowing yourself to be a little uncomfortable so you can hear some of this stuff, and in a space and place where you can learn. And I say this all the time: keep reading, keep studying, keep learning. There is nothing new under the sun. This story has already been written. The narrative has already been written. So if we can just go back and revisit, Mr. Brown, some of the shoulders of the great people like you, like Miss Joan Champara Mulholland, whose shoulders we stand on. There are things, there are answers in that history for us today. And I just think it's so important. And I think we, in some ways, dishonor history and those who fought with and for us when we don't do that. So I'm hopeful that people are reading the books, they're reading about you, they're reading about the movement, they're reading about the history before that, they're reading about all these things and educating themselves on, wow, I didn't know. Because remember, most of this stuff was taken out of the school system. It's not there. So many in the generations, my generations and other generations, they don't know any of this stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you want to learn in schools.
Yeah. So we see learning from that history, you know, there's an opportunity to learn from what happened in urban renewal, to not let it happen again under gentrification.
Yeah.
That just to have an understanding of that these are real people in real lives, and you know, we need to work for the best of everyone. And so,
all right.
Renee, we appreciate so much your time.
I've been honored. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me the privilege. Thank you.
I appreciate it. And Levon, thank you much.
Hey, you want to fix my name again, man?
Man, I don't know what you keep doing.
It's on the computer. It comes out that way.
No one's going to see it.
Okay.
All right. Well, well, thanks, Levon.
All right, my pleasure, man.
Yeah.
It was nice meeting you.
The pleasure is mine.
Who knows? One day I'll get to Knoxville.
No, we do know. We've already said that. You're coming.
I was in what's the town? It was in Utah. I never thought I'd be in Utah. So the chances of my being in Knoxville are pretty good.
Yeah, if you can get to Utah, you can get to Knoxville.
Yeah.
We're praying. We're praying.
Oh, I'll be there. All right.
All righty.
You take care of yourself.
Thank you.
y'all.
You do the same. Thanks a lot. Take great care. Be safe.
You too. You too.
Bye-bye.
Loki, take care of yourself.
Yep, same.
Well, it gets dark in here, you know that?
Yeah, it does, man. I mean, I'm like, my gosh.
Yeah, you know what it is it's funny. We used to have more light. Oh.
Yeah, well, it's like, getting darker
Yeah.
later.
So I'd have to, but because we had the light that was shining directly on, so I'll have to fix the light next time.
Yeah.
All right, buddy.
All right, man. Take care now.
Take care.
Bye-bye.